Welcome to the Pocket Size PR podcast, the podcast where pocket-sized portions of PR wisdom are distilled by communications professionals. I am your host, Charlotte Nichols from Harvey and Hugo, and I am delighted to be joined by Emma Thwaites, founder of Allegory. You're also Director of Global Policy and Corporate Affairs at the Open Data Institute. So Emma, please can you define PR?
I don't know how I'm going to match that enthusiasm. What an introduction.
It's just me. I'm just like wired.
You are that way. You are for as long as I've known you, you've been that way.
Oh.
So to define PR, well, it's a really challenging one, isn't it? I mean, full disclosure, I don't come from a PR background. So I was a journalist and then I was a civil servant for a while doing government communications campaigns. And then I started my agency and then, I've sort of had this foray, more than a foray, actually. It's been nearly 15 years into the sort of data and digital policy world. So I never really considered myself to work in PR. I definitely see PR as one of a range of tools, techniques, things that people can have in their kit box, organisations and individuals can have in their kit box to sell ideas and products and services. I think that PR is, I don't know what the official definition of PR is, but if we think about communications, I feel more comfortable talking about communications and possibly behaviour change as well.
Yeah.
And how we actually encourage people to think differently and to accept new ideas and possibly to change their behaviour in terms of the things that they do for their well-being or their family's well-being or the products that they buy or the services that they consume. And in order to do all of those things, you have to communicate well. You have to be persuasive. You have to, I also believe increasingly, and it's an expectation that people have quite rightly, that you have to engage with people and have a conversation with them. And I think that conversational element of communications has become much more important over the past 15 years that I've been involved in this field anyway.
I agree with everything. And I love that word persuasive. I don't think we've had that in the definition before. And also, I don't want a textbook definition. I don't want what the CIPR describes it as. I want real PR professionals, communications professionals who live it, breathe it, day in, day out to describe it for me. Because I think that makes more sense to people listening. And it gives them a better sense of what PR is, because I do think it's had a bit of a communications, almost like an identity crisis. So it's lovely to hear your definition of it.
I think, it's beholden on all of us nowadays to have a really broad array of skills and tools in our kit bag. Clients, in my experience, and quite rightly, expect us to be able to do a lot more things than we might have been expected to do 20 years ago. And actually the sort of divisions between the different disciplines have become much less acute.
Yes.
So, in my team, people quite regularly are called upon to do everything from that really sort of deep strategic thinking right through to social media marketing, digital marketing, things like this, podcasting, webinars, producing video, producing graphics and infographics. The expectation is that most agencies will have that range of skills.
Yes.
And actually the reality is we tend to work with a lot of public sector organisations or non-profits or startup businesses, SMEs that are not awash with cash and they want to get really good return on their investment. And so you want to be able to do as much of that work as you can in-house and provide as much as you can of the full package. And I think that's increasingly what we're seeing. And there's no doubt that some of the tools that we've seen emerge over the last 2 years, particularly when it comes to LLMs, generative AI, have really helped in that regard.
I agree. It's definitely changing the role of PR. I think our role's expected to be so diverse because we've almost seen to have technology backing us up and helping us. I don't know whether you think that's fair.
I think that we are at a really early stage when it comes to the adoption of Gen AI. And I think that a lot of assumptions are being made off the back of some very clever marketing and some very well invested marketing. So I think you've got a really interesting dynamic happening at the moment where clients or potential clients are making all sorts of assumptions about the utility of generative AI when they're not necessarily using it themselves.
True.
They're not playing with it in the way that you really need to in order to get familiar and comfortable with it. So I think that there's possibly a bit of preemptive action being taken in businesses where they might be making business decisions, operational decisions based on the promise rather than the reality of what generative AI can do. And indeed, the level of skill that the team that they have or the agencies that they employ have. Having said that, I think that where generative AI is a real boon for anyone working in our industry, it helps us, particularly as small businesses, to be a lot smarter in the way that we do things, a lot more efficient. A lot of the things that might have taken a long time for us to produce in the past don't need to, because you can use Gen AI tools to create templates and models. I've started playing with custom GPTs recently, which is essentially...
We're looking into that too.
Building your own chat GPT, which you can do for yourself or you can do for your client. And that's really useful.
Yeah. What sort of things are you using them for?
So we use it to take in invitations to tender or briefs, and to analyse what the scoring criteria is and what we need to be doing in order to pull together a really good proposal, and then to use our own, because in fact, very few of the pieces of work that we bid for come through a formal RFP process. Most of it comes from direct contact and referrals. So we have a template for a proposal, and we deviate from that in terms of the creative elements of it, and that's the bit that the GPT cannot reproduce.
Yes.
But there are certain fixed parts to the proposal that you can replicate. You will still want to edit it and make it designed for that particular client, but it just takes so much of the effort away. And in our recent experiments with the GPT that we've built, it's probably reduced the time by about 50%.
Wow. Yeah.
Which for a small business is significant. Because we take a huge amount of care with our proposals and we want them to be really good and really tailored to that particular client's needs and show really understanding of the audiences and the context and the objectives, what they would consider to be a successful outcome. So we want those bits to be the bits where we put our attention, not crafting biographies freshly, every time we do it, or trying to decide the layout. The other thing that we use, so we build custom GPTs for those kinds of activities, but I've been experimenting quite a lot with deep research function.
Oh yes, we have too. That's brilliant.
Which is really good. And I would still caution anyone that uses that functionality not to take it at face value and always to double check everything that it tells you. It's so important, and you have to learn to prompt well, and that you only learn to do that by practicing and getting it wrong loads and loads of times, as I have.
Yes.
And ending up in horrible loops that you're just getting crosser and crosser because you can't get out of them.
I know.
But for things like, if you wanted to do like a market analysis for a particular sector, it's really good for that. If you wanted to do a competitor analysis,
we use it for that.
Really good for that. So it gives, my agency, and probably yours as well, could never afford to hire market researchers to do this kind of work, but we can use these tools. I think it can give us a real competitive advantage. And for me, that levels the playing field a bit with the bigger agencies, where they have all of that capacity and knowledge and access to skills in-house.
I'd never thought of that.
So I think it's sort of it means that we can, for our clients who are probably going to have smaller budgets, we can give them that value, that same value.
Yes.
by utilising these tools. But you have to be careful about the data that the AIs are trained on, because that's really important to have an understanding of that.
Absolutely. And the data they churn out, as you've already mentioned. And I think almost our role's going to convert slightly to become brand custodians. There'll always be a monitor. We're always media monitoring, and that's always been a part of even traditional PR, but even more so the digital landscape, making sure that the right information is being churned out by AI, is being fed into Google on various websites, fact checking. I think that's going to have to almost become like a full-time role in itself.
Well, it's quite interesting, Charlotte, because one of the areas where we've seen quite a lot of growth recently is in crisis communications and reputation management.
Same, actually. Mm-hmm.
And there are certain things that generative AI can't do, and I can't see a world where it could ever do it. And that is in the domain of crisis communications, because whether the crisis emerges online or whether it emerges in real life, that human judgment and that ability to, just know what a good response looks like. But even before that point, what preparedness looks like.
Yes.
That doesn't come without experience and probably learning the hard way.
Human experience.
Absolutely. Dealing with crises, knowing how to respond in a timely, effective, appropriate way based on the nature of the crisis. Holding the client's hand sometimes, because one of the things that I think we have seen over the past couple of years is in-house teams, communications teams being reduced in size. And sometimes that goes with more experienced people moving on. And that can be very exposing if you're left with a really junior team, and sometimes with a junior leader in that team. So somebody who hasn't had that much experience themselves and might have different sort of experience. They might be a marketer who is now in charge of communications and marketing and having to handle those sort of emerging media crises, or crises that haven't actually hit the media but could potentially hit the media and be very damaging for the organisation. So I think that's one area where we're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of growth. And the other area is in thought leadership, which, I mean, there's a lot said about the content production capabilities of generative AI. But I think we're now starting to see, particularly on social media, what happens when people use generative AI repeatedly a lot to create social posts, for example. We've got a lot of beige slop going on. And
Love that.
And in my opinion, it's diminishing the experience of engaging with social media platforms.
Totally. I don't want to engage with a robot.
It's just, and it's so obvious when people have done this, right? So, and I understand why organisations feel that they have to, or individuals feel that they have to have a lot to say all the time. It sort of feels a bit like a kind of race to keep up. And particularly when the algorithms are favouring certain kinds of posts and people are paying to boost their posts, and there's the whole advertising piece going on. But actually, there's a lot of evidence to show that when it comes to LLMs, ChatGPT and others, that the algorithms favour quality editorial content rather than marketing.
Well, that's excellent.
And so I think what that means for organisations like yours and mine is that we ought to be persuading our clients to think about investing in proper thought leadership, properly thought through opinions
that are actually your own.
And that you're prepared to stand by. And also the other thing is research. Because I don't think it is the case that the only people who can invest in research are academic organisations. And it's a bit of a misnomer that research always has to be expensive. Most organisations nowadays, companies, produce huge swathes of data. or they have a customer base or a stakeholder base that they can interact with. And you can learn lots of lessons and glean lots of insights from analysing your own data, insights that might be more widely consumable and valuable. So I think having a good, strong thought leadership position that's based on something that your data has revealed or shown you is actually a great thing for organisations and companies to be doing. And it goes beyond the beige soup. It makes you stand out in your market, makes you stand out against your competition.
Absolutely. There was that big trend probably a while ago where it was all about the power of story. And now I think it is the data-driven story that is so impactful. But then adding that human emotion to it, human thoughts around it, their opinions, their real opinions, and sometimes spoken opinions on multimedia platforms like podcasts, like video, that is what's going to cut through the beige slop that we need to cut through. The beige slop, it frustrates me, but I do also see opportunity in it. Because if everyone's doing it, it creates all this rubbish content. So when you do what we do, you can create that high quality, data-led, impactful content that's going to cut right through that. And it's going to almost help, it's going to make our jobs easier in a way, in some respect. Obviously, there's challenges that go with it.
And do you know what I think is really heartening is we've started working with some new clients recently, some of them very young businesses. And they could have gone down the route of just chucking their business plan into an LLM and getting it to produce a campaign plan and a bunch of social media posts. They could have used a generative AI to produce their branding. But they decided not to do that. They wanted to work with human beings because they're, in all cases, quite new to the sorts of activities that we do.
Yes.
And so wanted to learn how it works and how it could bring value to their businesses. In one case, they've invested quite heavily in marketing, but actually have chosen, because they're a long-standing business, very well established, have a lot of data, have a compelling story to tell, need to diversify, need to reach new audiences, and took this, for them, quite a bold decision. Actually, no, we're not just going to keep paying for more paid advertising. We're actually going to invest in some thought leadership, which in their instance means some white papers, means thinking about how they present themselves at events and in podcasts like this, gaining more exposure as real thought leaders, and they are thought leaders in their field. You know, they've got an amazing story to tell.
That's a really good point. I think it's an opportunity for people who are genuinely thought leaders. And I think it's the people who aren't actually the thought leaders but want to be perceived as one that are using all this AI and tech to kind of almost boost their ego and image, but you can see through it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because you can almost hear the prompts, can't you?
Yes.
I want to be a thought leader.
Totally, I know. And I think
acting in the role as a thought leadership agent, give me 5 posts, you know.
It is funny. And we're in a world of almost like prompts now, the language that we use, what's the best prompt to use? Do you have any kind of tips on kind of prompting and teaching the models to learn?
Oh gosh, I'm not, everything that I've learnt, I have learnt by trial and error.
Same. I think it's the only way you can.
It is the only way you can. So I really got started on this last summer when I had this operation on my foot. And it was awful because I hate sitting around. But that extra 2 hours a day of not having to do the commute was brilliant because I just immersed myself in generative AI and no doubt went down through some terrible rabbit holes, in the process. But it was really good fun. And I've got to give a shout out to an old colleague of mine, Ian McGill, who runs a brilliant company called Open Opportunities, which is it's an AI-enabled software that scans procurement opportunities, tendering opportunities. Anyway, Ian is amazing, talking about thought leadership, just giving out really good little tips, like really accessible tips on how to start prompting and how not to be afraid of generative AI. And he produced a couple of little playbooks last year, which I I followed and found really useful. So I'd recommend that people who want to learn how to do this definitely follow him. And, you know, from that, all sorts of things emerged. I mean, the great thing about LLMs, right, the great thing about generative AI is like you go on to whatever you use. I mean, I tend to use ChatGPT, Claude for text. I've had a bit of an experiment with a few other things on that side. I use Beautiful AI for slide decks. I use Canva for design, but everybody knows that I'm visually illiterate, so I'm absolutely useless at that. Oh, totally useless. People tell me Perplexity is really good if you want to do lots of numbers work. So if you want to work on spreadsheets and stuff. No. So I think, you know, different tools for different purposes. But every day there's a new feature, and every day they get better at certain things, and then they'll launch a new version, and they'll seem to have gone backwards a bit, and you get frustrated because you're like, what's happened?
Yeah.
I think that happened in January with ChatGPT.
Yes.
There was a bit of a backlash against that version, whichever one it was that they brought out then. But I think when it comes to prompting, the most important thing to remember is, the language that has been programmed into LLMs can persuade you that it is human, right? And the whole sort of concept of artificial intelligence is a bit bogus. It is not human, and it's not intelligent like we are.
No.
You know, essentially, it's ones and zeros.
Yes, binary.
It's binary, and generative AI is a very, very clever probability engine. And the really clever piece of it is it's learnt to decipher human language and match up its responses to the questions and queries that you give it. But it still gets that wrong. So I think that being like, it's designed, it's almost baked into the design to try and fool you into thinking that it's like quasi-human, and actually it isn't.
Yeah.
It's better to think of it more like a calculator. You can't have, I mean, you know, it's quite fun sometimes to have a conversation with generative AI.
Yes.
But you're not having a conversation, not really. So when you're prompting it, that should inform your prompting to be as clear as you can possibly make it, because the clearer the prompts, and the simpler the prompts, the better the answers are that you're likely to get. One of the things that was a bit of a revelation to me was when I started asking ChatGPT to design workflows for me for ChatGPT.
Right.
So what that means is, so, you know, if I was, say I want to design a workflow to identify a new cohort of potential clients, I would ask ChatGPT to design that workflow for me and to give me the prompts. So what would be the prompts
that's
that I should use with you in order to get to this outcome? And the other thing that people say is really important is always to give the outcome that you want to get to. Like,
good
you know,
point.
this is what I'm trying to do as clearly as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And then, you know, what would you recommend would be the process that I should follow in order to get to that outcome?
Yeah. Or it's getting to know itself, even though it's not a human. What's the best way of working with you? Which is a question we'd ask a human sometimes. Yeah. Almost. And was it helpful then when you did that?
100%. Because from that, I built another custom GPT.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I wouldn't want you to think that, so the custom GPTs, you feed it information. It's like a walled garden. So you're training it on your content.
Yes.
It doesn't sort of take stuff in from elsewhere. So it's your data that it's working off.
Yeah.
It still gets stuff wrong. It's so funny. Like, you know, I found out of nowhere, because I'd basically did a download of our whole website and uploaded it into a downloaded it. Yeah. And I asked it to tell me how to do that.
Right. Okay.
So it told me how to do that, which plugin I needed to put onto WordPress in order to download the content off the website.
Okay.
Easy peasy. because you have to put the data into a format that it can understand, which is PDF or Word.
Right.
Did that, uploaded it. And then it started weirdly hallucinating about like introducing people into proposals, like staff members who've left the business.
Right.
Giving other staff members job titles that they've never had. Now, I know for a fact that there is nowhere in our data that exists.
Yeah.
And then you've got to be really firm. The other thing is that, you know, it doesn't work very well with negatives. Like, don't do this. You've got that wrong.
Yes.
You kind of have to be try and phrase things in a really positive way. Like, this is this person's job title. Please recognise this person's job title moving forward.
Yeah.
And then the other funny thing that it does, which I got to tell you, so a really good friend of mine, we were chatting, having a coffee the other day, and he said, "Oh, have you used the voice function?" Because I type, because I type really quickly, so I tend to type. But I thought, I'm going to have a go with the.
I haven't used the voice bit.
Okay, so the voice bit is really interesting. So I used it in my custom GPT first. It translated, I don't know what this says about my voice. It translated what I said into Welsh. No word of a lie. And then it gave me the response in Welsh. And I was like, why have you done this? Like, and where do I change it to change the function to?
That is funny.
It turns out you can't do anything about it. So I just have to, every time I have to say, I'm about to say something in English. Yeah. Please do not translate this into Welsh. And then if it gives me a Welsh response, I just put English in big capital letters. It's really odd.
Yeah.
How it's decided that I'm Welsh, I don't know.
It is crazy. And I think it's a brilliant tool if you know what really good looks like, because you can then check it all through. And, you know, like you're saying, it gets things wrong sometimes, but you can spot them. Quick edits, it still saved you time.
That's absolutely right, 100%.
It's the danger when people don't know what really good looks like.
Well, okay, so another little example for you. When the new government came into power, well, quite a while after they came into power. So Peter Kyle, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, he's the Secretary of State there. He was giving his maiden speech in the House of Commons. Now, it was very interesting, the new government, because, of course, we had lots of new MPs. And if you know the rules of Parliament, an MP has to give a speech before they're allowed to speak in the House.
Right.
So they have to give a maiden speech. The maiden speech usually involves a couple of paragraphs given in the parameters of a wider session. So during Peter Kyle's first sort of statement to the House of Commons, there were lots of other MPs that were standing up to acknowledge him and then give their own little bit. So lots of different MPs from lots of different constituencies. And it went on for hours and hours and hours. But obviously, my interest being in data and innovation and artificial intelligence, I just wanted to know the bits that related to that particular domain. So I was like, I don't really want to sit through 4 hours of listening to parliamentary TV. And I also don't really want to read 4 hours of transcripts. So I'll just ask ChatGPT to do me a summary that picks out the relevant bits, which it then did. However, because ChatGPT's knowledge bank at that point, I think it ended in 2021.
Right.
Now it ends in July 2024, I believe.
Okay.
But at that point, it could only reference historical. It did all these weird things where it was matching the things that were being said by new MPs with the old MPs for those constituencies.
Okay.
So you had a whole range of other politically inclined MPs being attributed with those statements, which they obviously hadn't made. In fact,
I don't know much about politics, so I might think, they've said it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And that was my thinking, because I looked at it and I was like, hang on a minute. Suella Braverman, Michael Gove, no, none of these people are sitting any longer. So I was able to sort of make it right. But if you were a really junior political researcher, if you were working in a public affairs organisation in another country, you wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
So you just have, it was, to me, it was funny,
Yeah.
but it was also a cautionary tale. We just have to be so careful, and you've got to know what you're looking at.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To make those judgment calls. So important.
No, I really agree. And kind of in summary, do you think that AI is going to take a PR professional's job?
I think AI, I think AI threatens tasks rather than roles.
Okay.
So I think if you are somebody whose job relies on, or your job basically consists of one task or 2 or 3 tasks, then there's probably a risk. But actually the higher order activities, I as I said, I'm seeing people coming back to having more of an appetite for that rather than less.
Yes. It's almost shaping us into how we started this conversation. We need to become multidisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary. I actually, being really honest, I worry for people starting out in their careers more than I do for those of us who've been around for a while.
I do.
And the reason for that is because a lot of the tasks that might have been allocated perhaps to an intern or an entry-level role, I think will disappear, particularly in smaller agencies and organisations. And then where does that training come from? And I don't think that would be a problem if, you know, the university education system or maybe apprenticeships were preparing early stage career people to think about the adoption of these technologies and therefore how do those entry level roles need to evolve. But actually I think that the university sector particularly has been really quite slow and quite cautious on the uptake. I think adoption, because the rush it's like an arms race, the rush to get these products onto the market, and adoption has not followed suit. And I think people culturally haven't had an opportunity to really get comfortable with them and to think about how they're going to use them in their own organisations. I mean, we have a policy that we published on our website about how we use AI tools.
Yeah.
And it's very common in competitive tendering processes for organisations to ask you to say how you use the tools. But I think more time and attention is required by organisations to really think about this. Generative AI is not just about writing content. That is the least valuable, in my opinion, of its capabilities.
Yeah.
And so I understand why educators would be worried about students using it and, you know, the whole sort of issue of plagiarism and, you know, what it's trained on and all the rest of it. But actually, I think it's the reality of our world, and people are going to be using these technologies long into the future. And so we should be adapting our education system to enable them to do that in an intelligent way that doesn't sort of demonise it. Because the world of work, when they step into the world of work, if they're in the knowledge economy, the expectation is that they will be using these technologies.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's like a disconnect there.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know the answer. We had someone we interviewed who's a journalism lecturer at Teesside University, and obviously you're doing what you can. He's embracing all the knowledge, all the practice, but he's essentially educating and training people for jobs that might not exist yet in sort of roles, you know, the prompt
really
engineer
hard.
one. Yeah.
And actually that industry, I think it's really difficult in news media particularly, because I think the pressure on journalists coming into the profession, I was a journalist, so I mean I can't imagine what it must be like now. You know, the expectation of productivity is so high. The number of stories that they're expected to produce in a day-long shift.
Yeah.
It gives absolutely no capacity for investigative journalism, actually doing the things that I did when I first started out, going to council meetings, going to court listening to proceedings. You know, they just have not got the time to do that because they're expected to produce so many stories in a day. And I really worry about that because, you know, if you're on, I don't know, an 8-hour shift and you're expected to produce 8 stories, well, whether you're permitted to or not, you are going to be using AI. You're going to have to because and your ability to fact check all your stories is going to be massively restricted. So I do worry about that kind of sense of churn. And then you think about, well, what's the value of that journalism at the end of the day?
You need that quality, you need that trust. And I think AI makes me question that and the future of kind of journalism. I mean, that's something that's been ongoing since the internet.
Oh yeah, it really has. And I mean, you know, you and I would be some of those that probably when the sort of whole sub-editing profession started to, I'm not saying die a death because I think in quality press, it you know, particularly the printed media, it still exists, but you know, I mean, it's terrible, isn't it? Spelling and grammar and just awful.
We employed someone who'd been made redundant as that role for a local newspaper. And she was just always checking and just saying, oh, it's disgusting. You know, this is why they needed me. This is why they needed my role. But it's true because it's that end output, the quality of it.
But we've become so accepting of it.
Yes, we have. All just for immediacy.
Yeah.
You know, who's first rather than who's got the best quality of story, who's real.
It's that pace again, isn't it? It's like, you know, getting things out fast. You know, it's that cheap, fast, good thing. Choose two. So I think the whole, actually, you know, Tortoise Media, when they launched, however many years ago that was now, 10 years ago probably, I think they're really onto something.
I haven't heard of them actually, but
And you know, I think that idea of slow, considered, thoughtful, you know, some of the publications like the Atlantic and the New York Times and the Conversation that produce long read feature pieces. I think that there's a real, if they can continue to hold their heads above water in terms of their revenues, we should be doing everything that we can to preserve that. And the BBC as well, of course. You know, I mean, I feel like independents, I mean, you can argue the toss over political independence, all the rest of it. That's not what we're here to talk about. But I think, you know, thoughtful, considered journalism. We have to preserve that. The fourth estate is so important.
I know, absolutely. And it brings us all back round to that thought leadership in whatever dimension of PR communications there is today. It has to be there. That authenticity, that truth. And
therefore you need so in answer to the question, you know, do I think that the profession, this broad sort of behemoth of a profession encompassing PR and communications and media in its broadest sense will disappear? I really don't, because actually I do think people will still want quality and they'll still want integrity and truth.
I really hope so. So we'll just end on your top PR tip, Emma.
You know what? I think so. I suppose it depends on who the PR tip is for, in a way, but maybe it doesn't. So my top PR tip is be authentic and be truthful. And whether you are somebody who is advising an individual or an organisation on their communications, or you yourself are, you know, a professional working in the communications industry, being authentic, I think, is really important, because I think there's just, you know, we're awash with mis and disinformation, and I think human beings have a yearning for truth.
Yeah, that's such a good word. Yeah, we do.
It's really important to hang on to that.
Love that. Yeah, thanks so much, Emma.
Nobody can do business with you if they don't know about your business.
But nobody will do business with you if your business's brand doesn't have trust and credibility. PR is the secret sauce in the marketing mix that can help achieve this and so much more. If you're interested in how PR can help your business, contact Harvey and Hugo, harveyandhugo.com, or email info@harveyandhugo.com.